Welcome back, fellow theater lovers, to our part 2 discussion of Shucked the Musical here on the BSB podcast. Before we dive into the music and stagecraft of this corn poppy musical, like, follow, and subscribe to us on all social media platforms. Spoiler warning, we are talking about the North American touring production of Shucked. So if you haven't seen the corniest show in all of existence, pause this video and return once you've seen this musical. On the last podcast, we talked about the story and of the cast, which this is just a story, an ensemble story of the Music Man set to corn. And that's pretty much it. We follow the story of Macy as she sets out to find out why her corn in the corn of Cobb County, or just Cobb County as some would call it, is dying, and stumbles upon Gordy, who is the con man of con mans, who's going to take Cobb County for everything they have. Hilarity ensues. There's a good wrap-up ending song. But today, we're going to talk about the music. I think what's interesting, RJ, about this music right off the bat is that it was written by, surprise, surprise, country music singer-songwriters. So we had Brandy Clark and Shane McAnally who wrote the songs for this. And I feel like that's probably appropriate for a show that is about corn.
Yeah, I mean, you want it to feel authentic, so...
Do you think that, before we jump into the actual music as we break it down, do you like when shows take experimental approaches to how they bring up about their music on stage? Because like this could have easily been a show that was a musical, like a straight, like a very musical, but they took a chance. They tried to be more authentic to the show. Do you think that more often than not works for Broadway?
I mean, I think it depends on how thick they want to lay it on. Like this show specifically makes sense because you're literally in a cornfield, so it would feel bizarre. Unlike unless you're pulling something like Book of Mormon, where you're like having the scene and then you're stepping out of the scene in this extreme musical number, and then you're stepping back into the scene. But this, because it was set more of a storytelling nature, I think that would have felt weird.
Sure. You needed the authenticity.
Yeah, like to each their own, ultimately, but I think you can do it well, or you can totally miss the mark. But at the end of the day, like, somebody's probably gonna like it, and somebody's gonna not like it. So
now, as two individuals, one of us grew up in the city, one of us grew up in their own farm, field, their own corn field. One of us grew up on music, not on music, they grew up on country music. And that wasn't the person that grew up on a farm. So how did you like the country feel of Shucked music?
I mean, I thought it was fine. I
just fine. But that's the thing though. It's just fine.
Yeah, I mean, it is exactly what it is. There's nothing like spectacular or crazy about the like country genre music vibes. Like it's pretty straightforward, which is where I do think they got it right, because when you look at country music standard, it's usually all about the same stuff, right?
Correct.
It's about the farm, or it's about the girl, or it's about like the beer. Like it's just it very much fits the narrative of I'm chasing my girl, our farm is failing, I'm chasing my girl. Like it.
Have you ever seen, this is slightly off topic, but have you ever seen the song from Bo Burnham where it was like he's going to write a country song?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, I'm going to show it to you one day, but basically it's about like how do you write a country song? Well, you put in the fact that you lose your girl, you lose your house, you get the beer, like, and it's all these different pieces. And it's because the country music feels very formulaic, because there are certain pieces, even to this day, but especially back in the 90s, like every song in the 90s was literally about my wife cheated on me, I cheated on my wife, I am depressed and sad, I'm the happiest man in the world because I got a wife and a car. Like all the pieces were there. And so what stands out about this is that as soon as it started playing, I was like, all of these songs sound like 90s country music in a way, put on Broadway. You know, like there was still a Broadway feel to them, but they were very much like, this is a country song. um so it's an interesting feel because I feel like you have to almost be in the mindset to be prepared for the fact that this is going to be country music about a show about corn, you know?
Yeah, and I think they set the stage pretty well. Obviously, the opening number is probably one of the most musical theater-esque song. Um, got a little choreo happening, um, reminding me of Beauty and the Beast, um, and the mugs in Caston. But
Yes,
it's yeah, it's unique, it's different. Even the staging was a little bit a lot of moving things happening, but nothing was really happening. Like, the
sure.
movement was to have movement, which I understand because the set is pretty simple, and when you're singing, I don't know, how many times did they sing the chorus? 3 or 4 times?
A lot.
I was like, "Alright, well, we probably could have taken one of these out, but it's fine."
We get it.
Um,
You love corn. Like,
yeah, yeah.
we know, we understand. Um, so looking at Act One, then obviously, I think that like the most notable song that most people are going to know is "Independently Owned," which was just a standout of this entire show. Like, mad props. We gave flowers to Mickey Abraham in the first part, but like Lulu is fantastic, and that is the song of the show. You 2 years from now, ask me a song from the show, and that's probably gonna be the only one I'm gonna be able to know back to you. What was it like for you to see that live? Because you had mentioned that you knew this song prior to going to see Shucked.
Yeah, well, and I think probably most of the people who have seen the show would agree with that being the standout. Of course, when you change it's like a Whitney song, like, when you change keys 3 times, or more, it's pretty impressive, and the characterization itself for that specific for being in the middle of a cornfield where the ideal is maybe more focused around men and farmers being men and how they are the ones ruling the roost comparatively to a woman who is independent. She owns her own business and she couldn't give two shits as to any other man, at least for Act One. Um, it's different.
It's powerful. It's so
Yeah.
powerful.
So and she was celebrated for that, right? Like, it wasn't just that it was a thing, it was also the fact that nobody had a problem with that being a thing, which
Correct.
when the show opens, it kind of talks about these stereotypes or what we perceive as a stereotype about situations such as the story. And so it challenges this song is a direct challenge to the perception that many might have about a small country bumpkin town with a couple dozen people in it.
I loved that it was like just the fact. She was her own business, like she owned her own business. She loved her business. She didn't want to try to change herself to fit into a man's like there was so many beautiful aspects. And at one point I actually was going to be like, okay. In my head, I was like, are they setting this up for her to be like the stereotypical lesbian role, which I was which it would still be great, but like, I was like, but like, oh, I don't need no man kind of thing. Like, was wondering if that's where it was going to go. And then it was literally just like I'm just a boss and I just am going to run, like, a man has to come into my life and like compliment that. And I was like, oh, that's even more beautiful. You know what I mean? Like, there was a piece of that. I was like, are you going to go for the stereotype? And they didn't. They were just like, no, this is the story of Lulu and how she is her own person.
Yes, and I will say it's interesting. I'd love to, as always, sit in the writer's room and wonder what they were thinking when they developed these characters because it also gave a little bit of queer,
It did.
um, just for her presentation. And so I always wonder like how intentional that was, if it was intentional, if it was a director choice, if it was a actor choice, if it was a script choice. Um, but
It does make me wonder if it was a little bit of Alex Newell in that role. You know what I mean? Like,
well,
was
yeah,
there a piece of that?
the makeup and the costumes and the you know wig and just the whole presentation. I was like, okay, like this is intentionally like again when we challenge tropes of country bumpkin farmer, like you don't think like hairdos like hers. You don't think of, well dressed kind of like femme, but still holding a level of masculinity a little bit that, yeah,
Correct.
like you mentioned, like, are they leaning into lesbian? I don't, they didn't,
They
but,
didn't.
but the queer was there. Um, just who knows for visibility. They didn't, there's no like plot point on that really, but it felt intentional.
It truly felt like pretty much anybody who was queer could play that role and do it well. You know what I mean? Like there was it's very queer coded, and then when they didn't go that way, I was like, that's interesting because like I felt like that was where it was headed, but it made perfect sense for Lulu. But I think when you just see her at the very beginning, you're like, it slightly was queer coded 100%. I do have to give a shout out to, um, how come one of the best songs in the first act goes to one of the most underdeveloped characters? Somebody Will, where Bo was singing it, was a solid knockout performance. It gave 90s country vibes. It warmed my 90s country vibes heart, who, as you know, you've been in the car before when it's come on. There's some really good country vibes I have going on. He hit that really well. And he was still, again, one of the most underdeveloped characters in the entire show, at least for the first act. And I was just like, they gave an absolute standout song to this role. And that was probably one of my favorites too from Act One.
Yeah, I was shocked that these songs were back to back because they're basically the same song or
Yeah,
writing. Like they have the same development of obviously not the same song, but they're written in a way that is power ballad, just like moving at a pace that's just a smidge faster, um, and just like belting the shit out of their voices. Um, like it's a from to your head to your toes kind of performance when you're singing it. I'm sure they are exhausted afterwards. Um,
for
but yeah,
sure.
weird that, and I had a couple notes. Um,
Give them to us. Give them to us.
I was just curious if it was a character choice or an acting choice. There was much of Bo's performance, or Nick's performance when he's saying his eyes were closed a lot.
Yes,
And sometimes we see that in like pop entertainment performances. But when I went to school for music, uh, so often you're coached to not do that because you're cutting off the audience from whatever the emotion and the care and the acting or whatever it is. You're cutting the audience off from that, and you can do it in variation, right? Like if that's a really really powerful moment where the character's like internalizing whatever's happening, maybe you're closing your eyes for a couple seconds at a time. But I want to say like 50% or maybe even more of the total length of all of his songs, his eyes were either completely closed or just so squinted that they looked like they were closed to the audience.
yeah, there was a lot of that going on, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I didn't know that like you were trained to have them open because it feels like in that moment, Bo was like trying not to cry, like the character was trying not to cry, so that's why how I interpreted it. But I get what you're saying, like because it does like shut off yourself from those an audience.
Well, and that's why I like, and I typically don't like to nitpick, but that's why I'm like, okay, if it was intentional, then I get it. Uh, do I think it could have been lessened? 100%. Like I based on the rest of his performance, I could tell how emotional the character was. I didn't need him to look like he was crying or on the verge of crying to know the pain that was happening. Also, that's just like an acting, it could entirely be an acting choice, much like when you go to concerts and performers do it all the time. Um, and they do. It's just it's really a preference thing for me. Um, and also just the way that I interact with music or understand it is by like watching the face of the person who's performing. So if, like I said, the moment you close those eyes, I no longer am connected to you. Like you are within yourself. I am not connected to whatever's happening. So
I do wonder if it's that, because I'm looking at his playbill right now. He's only been in 2 shows before, one back in 2014 and then recently in Tammy Faye. So I'm wondering if he just doesn't have a lot of experience, which again is just, I applaud him for giving his all on that stage. I mean, there was spit everywhere. You saw his neck straight, like about to bust open from those things. He was hitting those great notes. But like maybe
yeah.
that was one of the things that he hasn't quite found that piece of the puzzle about keeping his eyes open.
Well, and it reminded me of the performance we just saw in Hell's Kitchen. And I'm blanking on the name of the actress, but she did something similar where you're throwing your whole body into a performance, but that
Sure.
doesn't always mean that you're just closing your eyes. So I think maybe there just wasn't enough choreography for him to feel secure, or maybe for the character to feel secure. And so, whereas she was kind of wandering, had more movement, had more hand motions, was more fully bodied expression. Whereas he was, yeah, I mean, you could see the tension, which also as a vocalist, I'm like, are you in pain? Because um, sometimes you're just obviously so into something that you're doing and so passionate about it that, yeah, I think we saw every vein in his neck. Um,
Everyone. It was giving the mom from Hell's Kitchen, but
yeah,
about a lovesick man, you know?
yeah, it literally was. I would just, yeah, when you put those performances next to each other, it's like these could have the same effect, but Hell's Kitchen had more because I felt like I could see her. Obviously, I couldn't physically see him, but I wasn't seeing what he was seeing because,
Correct.
yeah. So anyway,
I'll get
that's my soapbox for the day.
I think that we can just jump into Act 2 then right there. There's not a song from Act 2 that I could sing back to you, which I think is interesting about this music is that overall, again, listeners, my opinion, this might be your favorite show, and I totally love that for you. The music was almost forgettable for me, besides the 1 or 2 songs that stood out, which I'm sure can be said about any show. But there was nothing about Shuck that's like, I can't wait to listen to that on my Apple Music. You know what I mean? Other than the fact of like somebody will and independently owned, I might tune those up every once in a while, but I'm not listening to this soundtrack through and through. So to me, this is almost a forgettable album. And again, listeners, I am so sorry. And I am also going to apologize in case this is the same feeling that RJ has. Well, we're not going to speak for him. RJ, did this music have, like, did it have it for you? Like, did it touch your soul? Did it go down to your bones? Or is this also a forgettable album for you?
Yeah, no. Um, I previously tried when I heard that Chuck was coming, I tried to listen to the album because I was like, I have no idea what's happening, and I typically like to at least have a general idea so that I'm not so thrown off by needing to pay attention to everything.
Mm-hmm.
But the only song I could get into was really independently owned. Maybe now listening back, I would appreciate a couple of the songs more. I did like the Friend song from Act 2, which is really the only one that I can remember. Um,
I don't even remember that. Oh, yes.
where and all I can think of is just the one line, the chorus. Um, but everything else, I don't know. It was to move the story along, so I felt like it did its job. It just, no, I'm not sure that any of them were really meant to be like. you're gonna leave here and think this is the greatest song in the world. Because again, you're trying to mix country music with musical theater, and it is still both. So if you step outside the musical and try to listen to just the song, it's too specific, and vice versa. Musical theater folk listening to country music, not sure. So yeah, not really the strongest on the. I think the music still had to be there. I just don't know that it moved the plot or really. It did move the plot. It just didn't really contribute much.
What I love about this answer is that you were trying very carefully to not just be like, I don't like this music. You were like, and we're gonna step here, and we're gonna step here, and
I mean, 'cause I think, like, so many shows, there's such intention behind what's happening, and so I don't love to, like, totally dismiss the music, especially because in the moment, I was enjoying it enough, right? But, yeah, I'm not gonna, like, go walk take I'm not gonna go to the gym and, like, put this album on. And yes, I
right.
do with other Broadway musicals because they slap, so
There's nothing like running on the treadmill to Phantom of the Opera. I'm just saying, like, but this is one. This is like one of those ones I'm not seeking it out for the music, if that makes sense. Like, if I'm gonna go see this, I'm seeing it. And again, I'm gonna say this about, and I keep comparing this to Book of Mormon, but I also don't seek out the music of Book of Mormon. You know what I mean? Like, I would like it when I'm there. I like it for the experience, but I'm not like, I can't wait to turn on Book of Mormon and listening to it during my 3-hour run today. Like, this is one of those albums that I'm not going to remember these songs other than the few that I've already heard. That's stuck with me. And that's that. I don't think we have to talk too much about the costumes. Again, this is very country feel, very country-esque. You're talking, gingham. You're talking jeans. You're talking shirts. You're talking country abs. We have all the pieces of a farm boy, farm gal living their dreams. But I do want to talk about the set because I think this is one of those things that I was most excited about, as you could tell when we were before the show began. They had probably the coolest, like, you have to admit, they probably had the coolest backdrop that we've seen in the show in a long time. That was really cool.
I appreciate, yeah, like old-fashioned backdrops. When is the last time you saw one of those?
No, like a long time. It's been a little while. We've seen, and guys, like, we are just going to say this. RJ and I have seen 78, 90 shows this year. So it was a really high number of shows this year that we've seen. There was not a set like this. That was really cool.
The artistry, the intentionality behind pieces that were real, even though there was a backdrop, I mean, it gave it more depth, which we haven't seen in a long time, whether it was a backdrop or electronic. Um, the only thing I can really think of was, and that was still a screen, was Beauty and the Beast
Correct.
to give more depth.
Yeah. I mean, just to give you guys an idea, they erected an entire barn on stage with the use of what looked like a painted backdrop and a few side pieces, but it gave the illusion that there was actually a barn there, which was by far just the coolest thing you could see. It was like simple in the fact that there wasn't a lot of going on, but the art itself wasn't like vibrant enough that it felt like Cobb County was really there in front of you, and it was really hard to see that it was even a back screen until somebody walked by it in the back, and it fluttered a little bit. Like, that was such a cool shout out to whoever designed that. Shout out to the creatives of Shucked, because that was probably the most impressive piece of the show, in my opinion, was that set.
Yeah, which is interesting because, like, really, aside from that, there was nothing else going on, right? We had a couple barrels, we had a couple rocks, um, but that was pretty much it. And it wasn't like anything crazy. It was a barn, right? Like, it's what you
Right.
expect of a barn, but it was just, yeah, it was very well done, very well developed.
We had some pretty cool corn too. Some corn that moved up and down and looked like it was dying and coming back to life.
Yes, which if anyone wants to tell us how that works, I have my theories. and I'd like to know.
So please, if you work on the production and you can tell us, even if we won't spread the secret unless you want us to, but we'd love to know in the comments or hit us up just how did the corn work? Because RJ had a pretty good idea of how it worked, and I'm pretty sure he's right, but I'd love to know for sure, just so we can know for ourselves. So RJ, we have reached the end. Time for our final verdicts. This is obviously a show for people who love corny jokes, including that one. This is a show that has a lot of humor. Is this a show for you?
If I wanted a good laugh, yes. Like if I'm feeling like I need to laugh, because even if I'm not physically laughing, being around people that are laughing, it's a joy show, right? It's a joyful show. And for that, I would go. I don't know that I would actively seek it out, but if it was coming, I would go see it again.
This is definitely a show I would see again, but with people who wanted to see it. Like, if you were just like, okay, Brian, I really want to see this show again, I'd be like, all right, RJ, let's go see Shucked. And I would enjoy myself and I would have a good time. This isn't one where I like, when it's coming, I'm getting excited because it's going to be here. Does that make sense? You know, like, I'm not like, oh man, 6 is showing up again. I better load up and pay for 6 different shows to see it. You know what I mean? Or Family Opera's coming. I better see that 10 times. This is definitely, it was enjoyable for what it was. It's not something that I'm going to be painting my room, you know, maize yellow to try to like, because I'm in love with corn now. Like, it's not that kind of show, you know? So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, it's not a spectacle piece. It's a comedy. It is a. I mean, you could translate so many of the jokes to a stand-up set. So
Which makes you wonder, with it being more of a comedy, kind of like a straightforward comedy, and this is not, again, people, this is not a slight against the show, is it worth the price tag? I think that's something that has to be considered. Is it worth hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a show ticket? Something to think about, people. And with that being said, we have completed our part 2 of the Shucked conversation. However, stay tuned for future episodes of the BSB podcast. Thanks again for joining us here in our box seats. Until next curtain call.